I want to wait because we're probably going to have people on Facebook.
It's nice to be here. Everyone knows how to do
Did you hit record? Go on.
Why?
Test, test. Hey, welcome everybody. We're going to get started here pretty quickly. If you can find some seats, that would be great. I want to remind everyone, we're going to be broadcasting tonight's public meeting on Facebook Live. So when there are questions, we'll bring a microphone around so that it gets picked up by the live feed. We're going to get started pretty quick here. Thanks. Do it again. All right, welcome everybody to the lower pool 4 Dredge Material Management Plan public meeting. I want to remind everyone this is being broadcast on Facebook Live. So for the question and answer session, we'll walk around the microphone to make sure that it's picked up by the live feed. Are we good to go in the back?
Okay. Is that loud enough? Everybody back? Okay, we're just looking for a thumbs up. As Bob mentioned, we're going to have the ability for folks at home to see this on Facebook. I'm Emily Durand. I'm Wabasha's mayor. Still having trouble? It's green, but it doesn't sound very loud, does it? No.
I can hear it.
How's that better? Okay, it's just a proximity. So thank you for coming. I'm Wabasha's mayor. This is the Corps' meeting, but I certainly wanted to welcome everybody and thank them for this meeting, and thank you for coming tonight. I won't give a lot of preamble. I want to introduce the colonel. I know you won't read his bio, but I think it's good for us to know who our partners are. And I was reluctant to use that word partner because I worked with federal agencies for a long time in my career in health services research, and the federal government doesn't just say you're a partner when they're working with you to facilitate the work of the government or to facilitate the work of other agencies of government. So I got caught off guard. The Post Bulletin called after the DMMP was released, and they asked for a comment, and I always pick up because I want the city to be able to give comment when our local press calls upon us. And I said the Corps would never call it a partnership. And I meant that in sort of a respectful way because they are the federal government and we have collaborated for a long time, but we've never entered into an agreement until this point. And it bothered those of the members of the Corps who have been working so hard with us on this issue. For those of you who've been at the table since 2017 or been paying attention to the issue, you know that, as the Colonel will outline, we had a different dredge material management plan presented to us as a community. It meant hundreds of thousands of cubic yards being trucked through our community, had a lot of social cost and probably important economic cost to the community. And so I came in at a time when the city had taken a position to essentially do public defense and say, hey, this is just not something we can live with, we really need to start over again. And so I came in as a newly elected official to a phase where things had decelerated and there was essentially a return to the drawing board. So I've been cautious about the relationship, but it's always been a good and fruitful one since my time coming into office. I didn't have the pleasure of knowing Colonel Hawkins, like many of you did, but I was very quickly acquainted with Colonel Jansen and have appreciated the partnership, lowercase p, but it has been partnership that has led to this moment. So thank you for all being here today. So just to let you know who Colonel Jansen is, he's been very present in our community, but through COVID, I've felt it's very hard as an elected official to be in communication with the public. I'm sure we've all felt sort of cloistered. So I do want to share with you that he assumed the command of the St. Paul District in July of 2019. He became the District 66 commander and district engineer. And so Colonel Jansen is a registered professional engineer. He's a certified project management professional, was previously serving the U.S. Army Corps Engineer Headquarters, as well as the Buffalo and Seattle districts. During these assignments, he was affiliated with the International Joint Commission and participated in response to Western Washington flooding and Hurricanes Gustav and Ike, and gained experience with navigation, flood risk management, regulatory, and environmental business lines, including formally used defense site remedial action programs. In terms of his education, which I've kind of forgotten, I'm not surprised because when I work with engineers, especially those that work in government, I'm always really, it's a privilege, tends to attract people who are really committed to problem solving, big and small. So Colonel Jansen himself has a bachelor's in science in environmental engineering from the United States Military Academy and a master's in civil engineering from the University of Washington and a master's degree in strategic studies from the U.S. Army War College, which is not the way he operates. He operates like a person who really wants to hear what everyone else is thinking versus come up with a big strategy. But I know that his strategic leadership has been very key, and we appreciate that very much. And I want to say thank you to the team. What did Jane Commander call Paul Mahayeski? Fountain City Paul. He's the local face of the Corps, which you may know him, and then Bob Edstrom is sort of the project manager. And we've really gotten to be familiar with this group, what we call the Wabasha team, which has included Craig and I from City Council. Craig also represents the Port Authority. Have been in lots of discussion to get to these pragmatic issues that have resulted in what I think is a very strong dredge material management plan. I'll be very clear in stating the city supports this. It's very different from what was presented in the prior DMMP. We wouldn't have been able to agree to this partnership-like arrangement if it didn't. So I'm very happy to be at this time, be here at this moment where we can have this meeting, and I'm very happy we can have it in person. Even a couple months ago, we were hedging whether that was going to be possible. So we thank our lucky stars that this is the format that we get to enjoy tonight. So I don't think I have much more to say, but I do carry around something that reminds me of sort of the bigger issue. And I'll try to be brief, but when I was a brand new mayor, I will say infrastructure was not going to be my forte as a mayor. I had other interests around developing agendas around housing and community development and economic development. And I felt very strongly that our Port Authority and City Council already had some people really invested in thinking about infrastructure. But I was asked as a new mayor to attend in 2019. You probably remember 2019. It's when we had 8th graders sandbagging because the water was 15 feet in March. We had an opportunity to present Wabasha's issues at a convening of riverfront cities. Angie Craig, our newly elected at that time member of Congress, asked for communities, Hastings, Red Wing, downriver, to come together because there was a critical moment with regards to flooding. But what I learned from those conversations, I remember the quote came from the Commissioner of Agriculture, and that was that sediment is a state priority because of the impact on the commercial navigation and safety of the channel. And I thought, well, I better get invested in understanding sediment because we certainly have that in our backyard, and we'll need to be thinking about that, certainly for the term of my service. But what I've really come to understand in working with the Corps is that if my great-grandchildren are on the Port Authority or my great-grandchildren are serving the City Council, they will still be talking about sediment, as will Bob's grandchildren and great-grandchildren, and anyone else whose kids or grandkids have the privilege of living here. So this is a long-term strategy. That's why the Corps does long-term planning and has that authority, and I'm pleased that you'll be able to hear about that tonight. Thank you. Oh, a couple housekeeping items. There are comment cards, and are they located? Have people had the chance to pick those up yet? There are written comment cards. If you'd like to leave a comment and you don't wish to vocalize it, you can sure do that. There will be a time for some Q&A, and will, as Bob mentioned, we'll bring the mics to you so that the questions can be heard here, but also on the Facebook Live presentation. If you make a comment verbally, but you want it to be a part of the official record, if it's a comment rather than a question, please do provide that in writing so that it is sure to become part of the public record, and at the very end of Colonel Jansen's presentation, he'll give you instruction about that. Otherwise, thanks for being here. We appreciate it. Colonel Jansen.
All right, well, hey, good evening, everybody. It's wonderful to be here. Mayor Duran, thank you very much for hosting us and for your very warm welcome. I am proud to call you a partner in every sense of the word, and I have no problem using that term. And I really appreciate you recognizing our staff who are hardworking. They're members of the community. They care about our activities in this region and the impact that they may have on the community. Our district was formed way back in 1866, over 150 years ago. So we have been here with you through many, many decades, and we intend to be here for many, many decades to ensure that the nation stays strong through our navigation program. And we would like it to be a positive experience for the public that we serve. I really want to thank all of you for making the time to attend tonight. I would really like to thank our state agency partner representatives who are here tonight. We work very closely with you. This was a difficult chapter in our history several years ago. But there are many good things that came from this, in my opinion. The first is that the process worked. Going back to the National Environmental Policy Act in the early 1970s, which drove the federal government to welcome and encourage public input into the actions that we take. And that's exactly what you did. You were heard in that process. We heard you. We stopped a plan that was in place, and we went back to the drawing board. And what is so positive in this circumstance is that the city could have dismissed us and let us go back to the drawing board on our own, but instead chose to partner with us and figure this out together and use some innovation along the way. So the last time I updated you was shortly after I assumed command of the district in 2019. Since then, who knew we were going to have a pandemic? This is the first public meeting that I've participated in that involved live participation. It's been all virtual the last 2 years, so it is a joy to engage with you in person. So tonight we're ready to explain our new plan. We are here to answer your questions and to invite your input once again as part of the decision-making process. I'm going to take everybody through a few slides. This will help me describe our navigation program, explain the proposed plan for handling dredge material in this region, and then invite your public input at the end. So first off, kind of bigger picture on the Corps of Engineers navigation program. The inland waterway of the Mississippi River is vital to our nation's economy and certainly our regional economy. It connects the upper Midwest to the global markets. Without it, we could not compete with many other sectors, particularly in agriculture. So it's a tough job. Part of having a strong economy means that we have strong national security. And I like to think that's why the U.S. Army is involved with the navigation program. For us, for the St. Paul District in the upper Mississippi, what the navigation program means to us is maintaining 13 locks and dams. Closest by would be Lock and Dam 4 just downstream. And then the 284 miles of federal navigation channel, 9-foot depth, that connect all of those locks and dams. That's the stairway all the way up the river to Minneapolis. Now, hand in hand with that is channel maintenance. And so sediment enters the channel. In this region, particularly in Lower Pool 4, it comes from the Chippewa River, and it comes in large amounts. Dredging is absolutely essential to keeping the channel open for safe and efficient navigation. So we are constantly addressing this channel. We survey it as soon as the ice melts to see where the shoaling occurred over the winter, and then throughout the navigation season, we're identifying where trouble spots are and addressing those. All told, our long-term average of dredging is about 1 million cubic yards of river sand every year. That's across our region. Here in Lower Pool 4, about 265,000 cubic yards. So over a quarter of our requirement is right here in the local area. And that's why this region is such a big deal. It's also not cheap. In fact, this is one of the more cost-prohibitive practices that we have all along the Mississippi River from Minnesota to Louisiana. And the reason is because all of the sediment and river sand that we dredge must come out of the river in most cases. Sometimes we're able to beneficially use that sand in ecosystem restoration projects in or along the river. But for the most part, the sediment comes out of the river. So we're paying about $10 a cubic yard just to dredge that river sand, and often between 10 and 15 additional dollars to manage it through a series of temporary and permanent storage sites. And I'm sure you've all seen some of these sites along the river. So what is 1 million cubic yards? So a cubic yard, 3 by 3 by 3 feet, about the size of your washer or dryer. If we had 1 million cubic yards, we would need 80,000 dump trucks to accommodate that. And if you line those up in a straight line, it would reach from Wabasha to Chicago. That's a lot of trucks. Obviously, we don't pay to truck all that sediment away. That'd be too cost prohibitive. It's much more efficient to manage sediment locally, and especially with beneficial use. And the advantage that we have in Upper Mississippi is the fact that we dredge river sand, and it's suitable for many beneficial uses: road construction, cattle bedding, sanding the roads during the winter, many beneficial applications. And we look to always pursue those opportunities going forward. So these are some of the planning considerations that were before us when approaching the Lower Pool 4 plan. Number one is that when we invest in this planning effort, we need to look at a long time horizon. Ideally, we're seeking to identify plans that will manage the channel for at least the next 2 to 4 decades. What that means to us for 20 years is about 5.3 million cubic yards of river sand in Lower Pool 4. Part of our consideration is to empower the city through partnering. We're going to talk about the agreement we're working on a little bit later. But the empowerment means the city has a vote and has a say in the way that we do things. And the city and the elected officials who represent you then have the power to work with us and come up with a way to dredge and manage sediment in a way that works for the public, locally acceptable. Land acquisition is always a component of our dredge material management planning. In this case, we would seek willing sellers for land acquisition, sometimes sooner, sometimes later in the future. I'll talk about that in greater detail. I spoke about promoting beneficial use of dredged river sand when possible. And we do have to remain mindful of what's called the federal standard, which is outlined in the Code of Federal Regulations. The federal standard drives our team to identify alternatives based on cost, environmental suitability, and the ability to implement them. We have to be cost conscious because we're dealing with taxpayer dollars. And that's why least cost alternatives are critical to our planning process. So now I really want to get into the details of the lower pool 4 proposal. I'm going to divide this up into 2 sections. The first is the primary approach, the approach that we are focused on and we want to make work for the long term. And the second portion is really all about the backup plan, and a backup to the backup plan, and a fallback to the backup plan, because I don't think we're doing our job as planners if we're not thinking about an uncertain future and what that could mean for us. So, the primary approach involves 3 elements. The first is a partnership with the city of Wabasha, and I'm going to get into that in greater detail in just a second. That's one component. At the same time, the Corps would be looking to take advantage of hydraulic dredging with our big hydraulic cutter head dredge gets so that we can pump dredge material directly from where we dredge it into the Corps-owned Wabasha gravel pit through a pipeline. And then the third and much smaller component is placement at our Alma site for free public use, and that involves removing sediment from one temporary storage site and placing it at a Wisconsin site that the public can access. And then the backup to backup, that all includes land acquisition. I'm going to talk about that in greater detail because there are multiple ways of acquiring land or the use of land. So first off, in the primary approach here with the partnership with the city of Wabasha, the Corps has an authority available to us called Section 217. This is legal terminology that comes out in congressional authorizations. All of our authorities from Congress are like tools in the toolbox. So this is a good tool that fits for this task at hand. What it allows us to do is to pay the city a user fee per cubic yard of river sand in exchange for regaining temporary storage space at our sites, our island sites. So an agent of the city would remove sand from the island sites. They would transfer it at a port facility, on the land base, and then transport via truck to a mining pit facility. The city's contractor would also be able to haul river sand from the Corps-owned site, the Wabasha gravel pit, and also move that to mining pit facility. That also regains space. So the name of the game there is regaining storage space for dredge sediments. We have a place to put it and a way to move it. And we did do that in partnership with the city with a user fee. This agreement is a written agreement. Negotiations are underway. They have been for quite some time. And it's a non-binding agreement. And I want to clarify what that means to us, because sometimes I think people perceive a non-binding agreement as a soft agreement that we can easily walk away from and we're really not committed to. But it couldn't be further than the truth. The reason it's non-binding for the federal government is because of the way our appropriations work. And we're budgeted on an annual cycle through the annual president's budget and congressional appropriation bill. So I am not permitted by law to commit taxpayer dollars that we have not been appropriated. That would be breaking the law. So all we can commit to each year is with respect to the funds that we receive for that year. But I don't want to scare people off in thinking that this would be an uncertain agreement. Because dredging is a priority for this country. It's a priority for the Corps of Engineers. We've had steady, predictable funding to do our job here for decades and decades. And we absolutely have the confidence that those appropriations will be there year after year after year. We just can't break the law in setting up the agreement. The other beauty of this approach is that it's the overall least cost option. Remember, I talked about the federal standard. So when we partnered with the city and worked together, it unlocked some innovation and it also revealed a much better solution at a better cost. This is just a cartoon sketch of what I just described. And so you can see we got the blue, that's the Mississippi River. We've got Wisconsin on the right, Minnesota on the left. Downstream is flowing down to the bottom of the picture. In the middle of the channel, that would be our dredge gets, for example. And in that case, we're dredging and we're pumping that sediment directly to the Wabasha gravel pit. On the top half of the screen, you see some of our temporary island sites. And that's where a contractor in the city's direction comes to the island sites, unloads those, brings them to the port facility, transfers to a truck, and those trucks go to a mining pit. Those same trucks could haul river sand away from the core-owned Wabasha gravel pit and regain space there as well. That's the concept. It's fairly simple, I think, when it's laid out as a cartoon. And the same exact concept is displayed here, just over the actual map of our island sites and the various pits involved. Now I'd like to transition to the other component of the plan, which really is the, in many respects, the backup, supplementary plan, and fallback. And this would be land acquisition or the use of land for managing dredge sediment in an uncertain future. Should conditions change, should for some reason our agreement dissolve, the investment that we've made in this planning process needs to stand the test of time. We've learned a tough lesson a few years ago, and we are focused purely on fee acquisition from willing sellers. And we recognize that some sellers may not be willing now, but maybe conditions change in the future and they change their mind later. In many cases, we can be patient and open to conversations as they evolve. That's why it would be somewhat phased. In the cases of acquiring agricultural land for these backup purposes, we don't need to use that land now because we have a great agreement going with the city. That land would remain in agricultural use. We only want to use that when we had to, in the future. So I want to walk through what some of these properties are that we're looking at. A couple of these are in the Zumbro River Flats areas, and we have some conversations underway. The concept here, you see a yellow dotted line. The yellow dotted line would be a temporary pipeline that we would install for about 2 years out of every 10 years. And the purpose of that is to unload the island sites, barge them down to the pipeline, put that sand into a slurry, and then pump it into an upland site. So again, we're in conversations with landowners. We would like to pursue a negotiated agreement to purchase these properties. And those conversations will continue. So that's one alternative. Another parcel that we would be interested in the future, and this one would be for a different reason, this one would be to lower our overall operational cost, would be the yellow parcel of land that many people refer to as the bean field. The gray shaded area is the Wabasha gravel pit, the core-owned site. The blue dotted line is a temporary pipeline that reaches where we dredge out of the channel near Reed's Landing into the Wabasha gravel pit. You may have noticed there's news on our proposal to install that pipeline with the bean field that would allow us to have a more direct approach into the Wabasha gravel pit, and therefore it would be cheaper and more efficient. We understand that there are no willing sellers here at this time, and that there could be future desired uses of this property before it may be ready for selling and using in this capacity. And we respect that and we recognize that. But we'll continue to watch that and stay engaged over the years. Another site for operational benefit would be a property we call G1. So a couple slides ago, I showed the properties from the Zumbro River Flats. This is the same map except for the addition of the little yellow shape at the bottom. This same approach here, we'd have a temporary pipeline 2 years out of about every 10 years. And this just connects that pipeline a little more directly to the river. So shorter line, more efficient, and therefore cheaper. Same thing, we don't think that there is a willing seller at this time. That could change in the future. We'd be watching for that and would be interested in advancing those conversations if those situations change. Another fallback would be to pursue the use of sites. Typically, the Corps' acquisition policy when it comes to managing dredge material is to acquire land in fee. It's called a standard estate. But we don't always have to use a standard estate. We can apply and receive permission to use a non-standard estate. So that would be a real estate agreement that's something less than a fee, like an easement. So we don't have to purchase the land, but we could use the land for a federal purpose. And that could be one of the ideas here in the future. Should our agreement not be able to work out for some reason, should other backup plans not work, then maybe we would pursue this additional space to move river sand to. And then I'll describe the fallback plan. And so the fallback plan is when we have to keep the channel open, when we don't have a place to put the sand, we could access the land that we recently acquired just downstream in Pool 5, the rolling prairie area. When did I lose the slides here? Just a second. All right, thank you for that. So again, the fallback plan would be to access property that we have recently acquired in Pool 5, which we call rolling prairie sites. This would be very cost prohibitive. It would involve potentially a combination of hydraulically pumping material from Reed's Landing into the Wabasha gravel pit and trucking that river sand quite a distance to this site. Could also involve barging that sand to the other pipeline site I mentioned earlier and pumping that into the rolling prairie site. This, to us, is a fallback plan, not something we would like to pursue, but would be an option if need be. Okay. Those are the various land acquisition options that are out there, but I really want to circle back to the primary approach because this is what we want to make work, and we want to make it work for a long time. And again, it's a partnership with the city. It's taking advantage of hydraulic dredging at the point of where we dredge it and move it directly to the Wabasha gravel pit. And it's also some placement at the Alma site for free public use. At the same time, we'll pursue some backup strategies, but in a way that works with willing sellers along the way. All right, so now we kind of move to public input. You may have noticed our news releases over the last month were in the 30-day comment period. That 30-day comment period wraps up pretty soon on April 19th. So tonight we have the ability of, as the mayor mentioned, of submitting written comments on comment cards. We're going to open this up to your questions here in the audience today. But even after the meeting, if you have questions that come up after you think about what we presented, you can submit those via email or written letter. And those will be included and responded to as part of our environmental assessment. And what I have on the screen here is our mailing address for that purpose. If you have a mobile phone, you can scan the QR code. That will take you directly to our website where we are set up to receive electronic comments. And I want to make sure you know we're available for your questions. So I'm available. Bob, Craig in the audience, Paul, the whole core team here is to address any questions you have. So I'm going to pause now, kind of turn it over to Paul to help us get into the Q&A portion of the meeting.
Okay, thanks, sir. Emily?
We can each take an aisle
Sure.
and do it that way.
So yeah, like Colonel says, this is kind of the open questions and answers period. So if you have a question, raise your hand, and I will, or Emily will come and have you ask your question, and depending on what it is, we'll see who can answer it. And we are also, as been mentioned, streaming this on Facebook Live. If there's any questions virtually, we'll have those asked as well and answer them in this format. So.
And I appreciate too, the core in our kind of our planning for the logistics encourages also if you need to stay after to kind of have more of a conversation and more in the question, you don't want to vocalize your kind of concepts, that's just fine too. We'll all stick around as well as city folks will stick around too. Anybody have a question on this side?
And we have the facility until 9 o'clock, so you've got us.
We got to sweep up and turn off the lights if you stay after that.
Right. So, any questions? Right here, I'll come on over. Jane, can I see you? Thank you. There we go. All right, I'll hold the mic and you can ask the question.
Is it geology only or policy? Is there no sites on the Wisconsin side that are in consideration as for managing this dredge spoils?
Okay, I will take that. So, I'll slide over here so the question is why not Wisconsin, why only Minnesota? It comes down to cost. The ability to get it there as economically as possible is what that comes down to. We are actually managing our material that we dredge right above Lock and Dam 4. It's an area called Beef Slough. All that material goes to the Omaha Marina, which is in Wisconsin.
Step into the,
Hello, sorry.
so people can see.
Yep, my bad. So again, the question is why all Minnesota, not Wisconsin? Again, we do have some dredge cuts, especially down by the Alma area, that does go to Alma and is managed there. Again, the answer comes back to cost. It's more cost effective in this middle part or the lower part of the pool right next to Wabasha to manage it here, just because of the distance that we need to move the material in order to find its final resting place. Okay, good question. Next.
I'll say this because I haven't yet convinced my family members, but if you have a phone and want to scan that code, you don't have to have a special phone. Your camera will just recognize the QR code and take you right there.
Yes.
My kids taught me that.
Me too. Emily?
Yes, I'll come back to you.
This is probably a question for me and Command. I can only imagine the number of staff from the floors that are involved in this project. What staff, excuse me, from the city are involved?
I can start to answer that, and then I'll see that we fully answer it with our administrator and our Port Authority president. So I wasn't involved early on, although I know from sort of the public record that it was primarily our Port Authority and our city administrator and eventually our finance director as staff of the Port Authority, as paid staff of the Port Authority, that were most involved. And then as we entered into a new era with newly elected officials, I joined that group. We had Craig Fulton join our local group. We're of course paid as elected officials, we're not staff. And we have had the involvement consistently of Caroline, our city administrator, Caroline Gregerson, and continuously our finance director. So they're serving in the capacity primarily of the Port Authority. Am I missing any detail on that?
Being advised by our city engineer.
Of course, how did I forget? They're not City Hall staff, but we rely heavily, of course, on our contracted city engineer. Brian Mullen is here. And then throughout, there has been also the involvement of our environmental attorney, Daniel Marks, who isn't here tonight, but he's been a part of a lot of the facilitated conversations we've had in the public domain to date. How could I forget Brian? Obviously, we have our engineers involved. And that's coming up too as a Port Authority agenda item, is reviewing that work to date and setting the course forward. Good question. Anybody else?
this is for the board. And I was wondering about that G1 site you had that's proposed or whatever, the backup plan. That's right in the Zumba River channel. How are you gonna keep that staff from going back to Mississippi?
Okay, yeah, so the G1 site, like I said, it's in the historic oxbow of the Zumba River there. And based on our hydraulic engineers have looked at it, and we've had conversations with the DNR, where it's at an elevation that's high enough that that concern is not there over the entire site. There's some parts on the edges that we would have to avoid, but for the most part, it's high enough and dry enough where the material would stay there. And we would ensure that it's stable to stay in that area.
I've seen that piece of land many times in the water, in the Zumba. I've driven my boat across it.
Recent, like in the recent
20
floods?
times that was all underwater.
Okay. Okay, good.
Paul, your deal's on the outside of the dike, right?
Correct, yeah.
That's what he doesn't understand.
Yeah,
Okay.
that little triangle there
Yep.
is on the other side of the dike, it's in the Zumba River channel.
Maybe you can repeat a little bit, Paul?
Yeah, so the question is regarding the G1 site and its relation to the Zumba River flood control project that's there. And this is actually somewhat protected by that project. The dike itself actually ties into the high ground just north of that. But again, our engineers, hydraulic engineers and folks, and we've coordinated with the flood folks from the Minnesota DNR, and they've approved our use of the site. But we'll definitely look at it some more, especially if you're saying that you've voted over that in the recent years. So again, it's not a primary site right now, it's something we'll pursue, and it's good to know, so thank you for that input.
We have another question on this side.
I understand that the city or the Wabasha Port Authority for the barge terminal is separate from this lower pool for dredge material. So are we going to have another forum for the barge terminal? For the Port Authority? Yeah.
Brian, can I come over to you to talk about the timeline associated with that? Yes, the answer is yes. And I'm going to get the details from.
Mayor, can you restate that?
Yes, the question is, the city is in pursuit of a barge terminal facility separate from the DMMP, so it's not an element of the Corps' plan. And the question was, will there be another forum for that conversation? So I'll take the question to our city engineer.
Sure, so the barge terminal facility will have, I think the question was, will there be an opportunity for public input related to the barge terminal itself? Did I understand that question right? And the answer is yes. So the Port Authority's authorized, one of the steps that we have to take prior to constructing or permitting a barge facility is an environmental assessment, state level environmental assessment. Actually, it's an environmental impact statement. The Wabasha Port Authority authorized that study to begin. It's in process. We're actually very close to the point where we would be issuing for public review the first step in that environmental assessment. So in the very near future, there will be a public opportunity for input on that environmental assessment. And then there will be a lot of other steps related to permitting that facility prior to it ever being built. So there will be a separate process and an opportunity for public input related to the barge terminal facility.
If you want general information, I wish I had the meeting dates. We can probably figure that out. There have been about 17 public meetings where there's been some level of discussion about the barge terminal facility, the DMMP, where we're at. A lot of it was not a waiting game, somewhat a waiting game. There's internal review that has to occur in the agency, so we couldn't really move that along any faster than it was already moving. But there were a couple opportunities for input. It was during COVID, so there were, I know, at least one really engaged meeting. It was a joint meeting of the Port Authority and the regular city or special city council, where we had our, as I said, our attorney there. So there's some good background information existing in the public record on the YouTube is the easiest way to digest it, unless you like to read minutes. But if you go to the city's YouTube channel, you can find those meetings there. I don't remember another joint Port Authority City Council meeting since that meeting. So that would be the most recent discussion of it. But we haven't been to the place where we realize, yes, the DMMP looks good. Yes, we're not hearing a lot of public comment that says otherwise. We're starting to work toward the agreements where we felt that would have been getting ahead of ourselves. So the Port Authority has been making those decisions in sort of a measured way in terms of authorizing the use of funds, et cetera. So. Go back to our side.
As far as setting ending heights of sand, such as Rose Peterson, you elevated quite high, and I think the Corps decides that, because you know that, I believe. But when it comes to a private, like the corner site, and you have hauled a couple out of your core pit over the winters and started filling in, who sets the final topography for that? Is it the city, because it's, or is it, or would the Corps do that?
So the question is regarding the final elevations of where we place the material. We'll do that in a collaborative effort, especially within the city. It'd be between the Corps, the city, and the property owner on what is decided as an appropriate level. And that's what we've done with our West Newton site as well down near Kellogg. It'll be a collaborative input on what we think is a reasonable elevation.
I don't get a lot of exercise, so it's all right. Can you describe West Newton site?
West Newton chute. Okay, so we have a dredge material placement site, a river sand resource center at West Newton, which is east of Kellogg, right on the river. And that is where we have a site that we acquired in the late 80s, early 90s, where we brought in sand and we've turned it into a sand prairie. There is still sand there available for folks to come in and use for their own use. Now, another answer to that is West Newton Chute is also a side channel of the Mississippi River. And we named our site after the side channel of the Mississippi River. So that's where it comes from. There is a community called West Newton in that area, and it's just called the West Newton Chute. Back in the old Untitled River maps, that's what they called West Newton Chute. So we named our site after the topography and what the river pilots would call that area. That'd be the white area there. There's gonna be a yellow area that the colonel's outlining, yes. Yeah, there's also a Department of Natural Resources boat ramp, improved boat ramp at that site as well.
The question is, so the park-like area stays the area that's has vegetation added, I think, is that what you meant?
Yeah, okay, yeah, so we have a boat, yeah, the Minnesota DNR has a lease from us to construct and operate a boat landing there, and that will continue to stay that way. Our agreement with them is for like 50 years or something like that, so that should be there and be continued to use that way as it has been. Now, I will caveat this and say, when we purchased that property from Rosie Peterson back in the day, it was purchased for managing dredge material. Now, we did partner with the Minnesota DNR to let them come in and build and operate a boat landing there. However, there may be times where that boat landing needs to be closed so we can bring more sand into that site. So for the most part, it's gonna always be there, but there will be times we'll have to close it, for a week or two. Unfortunately, a couple years ago, we had to close it for 3 years because we had a big project going on. So that's going to continue to occur, but we're going to try and do it on a less frequent basis, or at least duration, not as long, but maybe more frequent. So again, the boat landing will stay there. It'll still continue to be operated, but it will be closed at times for our material management operations.
So this is in reference to the city's handout, and the question is about the red initial movement of river sand, and that from the Grant Boulevard corner onto 61. So just some conversation or some clarification about that movement. Brian.
We'll have Brian address that.
Yeah, so if you're looking at the figure that at the top right says Tier 1 Management with Section 217D agreement, and there's the red arrows, yeah, that's the route for the trucks coming from either the Carl site using the Grant Boulevard and then the new frontage road that was constructed by the county onto Highway 61, and then down 61 to the what is sometimes called the Dairy Queen pit, across from the Dairy Queen. So if you recall, I think the Corps has had some contracts to haul material from the Wabasha gravel pit across Highway 61 to that Dairy Queen pit. So it'd be a similar route for trucks coming from that pit over to the Dairy Queen pit or the Wabasha sand and gravel pit on the map. And then from that Carl site where the port facility would be down 5th Grant Boulevard, then on the frontage road to 61, and then down to that Wabasha gravel pit, sand and gravel pit, or the Dairy Queen pit.
If I can clarify one thing, so you're asking about Gruber Valley Road? The trucks would only drive on that enough to get into the pit that's there. Oh,
So some concern expressed for noise on that truck route.
So concern with noise pollution associated with trucks.
Oh, the concern was with noise for the trucks? Yeah, well, it's a state highway, it's a county road, so yeah, it's authorized for trucks, and we need to use trucks to haul the sand, and there's really not a whole lot of ways to get around that, unfortunately.
You said there is an environmental impact statement in process. Is there an end date to have that complete, and will that be shared with the public?
Yeah, we don't have an end date right now. We are nearing the end of, so that environmental impact statement is a state level environmental review process. Step number 1 is the development of a scoping environmental assessment worksheet, and we're at the very tail end of developing that. When that's finished, that will be released for public review and comment, and so the general public will be able to comment on that and the assessment of the environmental impacts, and also state agencies. The whole purpose of that is to gain input on any particular issues that might require further study, which would then be wrapped into the continuation of that study, which would be the environmental impact statement. And then once that whole process is completed, the whole purpose of that environmental review is to inform the governing agencies on providing permits for the construction of the facility. So there'll be the opportunity at the end of the environmental assessment worksheet, the scoping EAW for public comment, and then also at the end of the completion of the environmental impact statement, there'll be another opportunity for public input as a part of that. And then following that, the city would have their own permitting process for the construction of the facility. And again, there would be opportunities for input related to that process.
got a question here.
Could you quickly describe how often this process will be used every year?
I'll ask a clarifying question. Which process are you?
Just using, I mean, how often are you actively transferring sand between the locations during a normal year?
Right. So for the Corps' dredging, we'll dredge about 265,000 yards every year from the channel and put it on those islands. We will work with the city through their contractor to move about 260,000 yards from a combination of those islands and from our Wabasha gravel pit to get to the final destination of where it's going. So we'll do this annually about that amount, if not, maybe a little more, just to try and get ahead of what's on those islands.
I mean, are we gonna have truck traffic every day, or?
No.
That's what I'm asking.
Yeah, so-
2 or 3 weeks, or a month, a year?
Brian, why don't you pop up here? I'll take a swing at the answer, and then I want Brian to make sure that I'm saying this right, but the way we're envisioning this is when the islands are unloaded, that'll be during the summer months. They'll get material to the port, and then that'll be trucked. And that will probably happen over a 2-3 month, maybe a little more time. And then that operation will be done. But then in the winter months, like we did a few years ago in 2016 and 17, I believe it was, when we had a contractor take sand out of our pit and bring it over to the other pit, that'll be done in the January, February, March timeframe, after the tourism season, not much traffic out there. That's how I see this going, is that's how I see it. So summer and then winter, and there's breaks in between. And again, to be most efficient from a contractor standpoint, they're gonna want to do it all as quick as they can and move on.
We have a question here.
So how many trucks a day, days are we talking?
So that, I would say, is one of the, that's some specifics that we don't have yet. So that's gonna depend on, the city will have a contractor that is doing this work for them on their behalf. And specifically, how many months, how many trucks a day, that is yet to be determined based on their operation schedule. A part of the environmental assessment worksheet and EIS process is an evaluation of truck traffic, the potential impacts from that. There's concern expressed about pollution and noise and those types of things. Those are all questions that the environmental review process has to answer. And so if you're interested in those kinds of details, look to the environmental review process to help answer some of those questions. But today I can't tell you specifically how many days a week, how many trucks a day, and that type of thing.
I'm not asking specifically, could you just ballpark figures?
Well, I think we know that there's, 270,000 cubic yards a year on average. And I think Colonel Jansen had a slide up on the screen that talked about how many yards a truck could hold. It's somewhere in the neighborhood of 15 cubic yards, depending on the types of trucks that they use. So you can do that math, 270,000 cubic yards divided by 15, I think we're talking about, it's gonna sound like a big number, but somewhere around 9,000 trucks a year, spread out over that period that Paul talked about, some in the summer months and some in the winter months, so.
Oh, there is a traffic analysis in the report, in our report. And I think it talks about roughly 30 days.
Okay, so Craig is saying, in our DMMP, that the draft that's out on, so there's a traffic analysis appendix of that, and it talks about some of those details and just about, what was the number?
It's 30 days falling out of Wabasha gravel pit, and if we're talking about the 217 arrangement, it would be something similar to that, but it would depend on the dredging operation.
Right. So basically, we're saying about a month for the dredging to accommodate the dredging operation. It'd be about a month of trucking, roughly in that time frame. And again, that's in the appendix, and we get more of those details later. But again, more of those details will come out with the.
Don't be scared by 9,000 trucks a year either. It sounds like a lot of trucks, but when you look at the volume of traffic on Highway 61 or any type of large highway, 9,000 vehicles in a day is really not considered a large volume of traffic. So even though 9,000 trucks seems like a lot, it really isn't in the scope of the traffic volume on a highway or on a roadway. So.
And I think we'll have to be good about the communications that are part of the public input process, because we're not starting with 0 trucks. So we have to realize we're comparing to an existing truck volume and be compared appropriately, so that people are clear about that.
Right, there'd be a percent increase. Now, one point I would like to make, in a continuation of that is what we're talking about here on the 217 is the shortest route for the trucks to go in the least amount of trucks. If we go to one of our backup to the backup plans, which could be trucking the material 10 miles down to the prairie, you're talking more trucks and more round trips and even more. So again, we're thinking this is the least impactful from a cost perspective and the traffic being it's all right here versus, you know, the 10-mile one-way trip.
Questions, yeah?
Could you clarify again regarding the real estate acquisition? You mentioned the Rolling Prairie would be kind of like your last resort. But I was to the understanding that that was going to be purchased by the Corps, but you're not going to utilize it until you've exhausted the others?
Yeah, so specifically for the Rolling Prairie site, we have acquired that. We acquired that in 2020. So we went through a process, found a willing seller, and we now own that property, but it's so far away. It's 10 miles away one way. If we would come to having to use that site for our material, what we would do is take it parcel by parcel. We would identify roughly a 10-acre area and bring our sand into that area and begin managing. Everything else would be still in agricultural production. Now, there are some parts out there that we will revert back to wetlands. We will do some wetland restorations and things of that sort. But the areas that we don't actively need for placing sand, we would lease back out for agricultural leases so it can continue to be farmed. Go ahead.
So you're leasing the property out, but, and then get the money back, but now that property has been purchased by the Corps, so it's off of the property tax roll, correct?
Somewhat. You want to take this one?
Thanks for that. Right, because it is owned by the federal government, it does come off the county tax rolls. However, it's not all the way, those fees are not, those revenues are not entirely lost. And that's because of a program called Payment in Lieu of Taxes, PILT. This is a program that provides for federal payments to local governments to help offset the losses in property taxes due to the existence of non-taxable federal lands. So we currently own and manage properties in this region, just short of 7,000 acres. And so as an example, in fiscal year 21, so just last year, through that program, Wabasha County received a payment in the amount of $17,609 under that program. So instead of tax revenue, received that revenue. That's an important question, and it means something, right? Because dollars count for this community, right? And that's another impact that is out there with these proposals. So we would certainly be interested in assisting the community in making sure that this program is set up and can fully take advantage of that.
So is this payment in lieu of taxes program fully funded every year?
I do not have an accurate answer to give you. We can take that question for our assessment and provide a formal response to that. That'll allow us time to do some research and give you an accurate answer.
You said after you do the environmental impact statement, you would have, you release the findings would be released for public input. Where was that released to? The Corps, to the Port Authority, the City Council, or how do you find out?
This is a state of Minnesota requirement, so the Port Authority, the Wabasha Port Authority would be the responsible governing unit, for accomplishing that environmental assessment. So there would be a published public notice on that public comment period. So formal notice in the paper, city Facebook site, website, and then also the state of Minnesota has the Environmental Quality Board publishes a notice, a statewide notice for those types of things as well.
When you're taking the sand off of the islands and then you're going to be placing it at the sites, what are you going to do with those islands once you've removed all the sand?
So the question is, when the island sites are unloaded, what will we do with those islands? We will continue to put sand back on those islands through our dredging operation. So again, we have to dredge about 265,000 yards every year to keep the channel open. So we, the Corps, will continue to dredge and place sand on those islands as we've always done in the past. The difference now is that we'll be working with the city through the 217 program, and their contractor, they'll come and unload those islands and create capacity for us so we can bring more sand in. So the islands will continue to be used as they are today.
She has one more, then I'll come to you.
Go ahead.
Okay, so we understand that the majority of the sand comes from the Chippewa River, which we always hear that it's a young river, it's untamed. What is the Corps doing? Are they doing any other research? Are they doing any other, or looking or pursuing any other methods to tame the sand so that we don't have so much sand and dredging year after year after year?
I don't need the cheat sheet. So the question is, the Chippewa River, and why aren't we doing something more about it? And like you said, it's a much younger river than the Mississippi. It's a bigger slope on there, so she's bringing in her sand like a young river does. What are we doing about it? We've researched it. Internally, we researched it. We also had independent, specifically Colorado State University, who does a whole river dynamics department, and they looked at it independently and came back with the same solution as what we're doing right now is the most efficient way, cost-effective way to manage the sand that's coming into the river and also keep the navigation channel open. So the reason we're dredging like we do where we do at the Chippewa, we have a sediment trap right where the river comes into the Mississippi River. We dig a big old hole there and we dig that out every 2 to 3 years. That's the quickest way for us to get that out of the way. Now we have looked at stabilizing the Chippewa River, trying to cut down on that sediment that's coming in. And the conclusion is we could put rock on the sides for 5 miles, either side and the bottom. I couldn't put it bottom because it would wash out, but after spending millions of dollars to do that, once we finish that, 50 years later, it would take that long for us to even track it, we may reduce that sediment coming in by hopefully 10%. So it'd be a lot of expense and a hope that the sand would stop coming, and there's no guarantee that it would. So again, internally we've looked at it, and we've had other independent folks look at it and came to the same conclusion of doing the same thing. Now we are looking at other ways to maybe take the sand out of the river sooner. But in order to do that, we need to have property somewhere up the Chippewa River to be able to do what we're doing right now. We'd have to acquire some land, be able to get a dredge up there. It's really shallow. So there's a lot of factors that go into trying to do what we're doing here versus somewhere up between here and St. Durand. It's prohibitive.
I'd like to just chime in too. That's a frustrating response, a little bit. It's frustrating for us too, and as a matter of fact, it's been frustrating for over a century. And when I read some of the historical accounts of how the Corps opened the river to navigation, the delta at the Chippewa River has been a constant headache forever. The Corps of Engineers, I like to think, could find a way to engineer our way out of anything. But that doesn't mean we can engineer ourselves out of something at a value to the taxpayer or something that's ultimately worth the benefit and cost and a value proposition. So it's just a frustrating situation with the Chippewa River, and unfortunately, dredging the sediment is the most cost-efficient way of handling the problem.
I think there was a question down here. I can move down there because it's for Paul.
I've got one here,
Okay.
and I think it's quicker this way, so here we go.
You mentioned capacity, and to kind of set my mind straight on how long this all should take, if nothing happened, how long would it take to fill an island up? How long would it take to fill up the Wabasha sand and gravel site? So, is there urgency, or what's the timeline on these things that need to be done?
Right. So under the 217 agreement, and again, the question is regarding timeline and how long will we have to fill in the pit, the Wabasha sand and gravel pit behind Dairy Queen. Right now, we're hearing there's about a 10-year capacity as it exists today. So it'll take about 10 years of managing the islands and bringing that material to the Wabasha sand and gravel pit to fill up the existing hole in the ground. However, the company owns the corner company, the Wabasha sand and gravel, is continuing to mine their way, the property that they own, to the south and to the east. So they plan on doing some expansion of that, and we hope to realize those capacities as they realize their mining there. So at a minimum, we have 10 years right now with the solution, and we're looking to keep that going.
He was also asking, if we did nothing to implement a solution, how much more time do we have absent this plan?
Yeah, in the absence of the plan, we would probably run out of room in 2 to 3 years in managing on the existing islands that we have and bring material to our Wabasha ground pit that the Corps owns. Thanks for that.
Test. While there's a lull, I was wondering about that, the G1 property. Again, I just want to clarify that what you see on the map as far as the image that was up here, that's based on parcel lines. So I think I understand part of the confusion. Like when you look at that oxbow, if we had that superimposed, you clearly see that there's water overlaying that orange blob, if you will. I want to make it clear that we wouldn't be placing in the water there. We would be placing on the upland portions of that orange blob. That blob basically just denotes the actual like real estate plot lines of that parcel. You know, what was bought and sold. So I think that might lend some clarity to that. We wouldn't use it exactly as it looks on the map. We would use portions of that site within those lines, away from the water.
All right, I think we're at a good transition point to move away from our formal portion and into our informal portion. So like when we break here in a minute or so, I'd like to have all the Corps staff available for one-on-one interactions with you. Again, as Paul mentioned, we have about 45 minutes left of the space available here. The other thing I would like to really invite you to is to review our work, read the plan. Which is, you can find the information on how to access that with the materials we've provided you today and through the website that we've shared with you. And I really invite you to reflect on what you heard tonight. I really welcome your comments that you can provide, either written cards on your way out or over the next 6 days by email or written comments, so that we can make sure we address everything that's on your mind in great detail. I think you learned there's some more complexity to this approach with the partnerships. So there's more details to come. more public involvement to come. But I really want to thank you for, again, investing your time to engage with us tonight. So big thank you to all of you. We'll take a quick 30-second break as the core staff comes forward and happy to discuss anything with you one-on-one. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Can you hold that for a second?